When it comes to imagining a scenario between characters from different shows, there's one that always intrigues me. That being Johan Liebert vs Sherlock Holmes. As to why this is such an interesting matchup, let's take a look at both of them. In one corner we have Johan from the anime monster. Seen as one of anime's best antagonists, someone who was constantly erasing his past, killing those who knew him, barely leaving any trace of himself or his involvement in crimes. A man who even called himself, well, non-existent. Now in the other corner we have Sherlock Holmes, the most influential detective character in history, with insane observations. Being able to notice seemingly unreal amount of traces of people, whether the trace is directly on the person or where the person was, or what object that person owned, you can tell a whole lot more than the average detective, dissecting every trace from the bare minimum. Therefore, serving as the perfect challenge to Johan, who leaves barely any trace to deduce from. As if he was never there, as if he didn't exist. But up against Sherlock, would Johan really be untraceable? Would the nameless monster really convince the world that it didn't exist when a man like Sherlock would be on his trail?
If there is a monster out there, John, there's only one thing to do.
Let's dive in.
Let's get ready to rumble!
This video will focus on a hypothetical scenario where Sherlock would attempt at solving the case in Munster and catch Johan Liebert. For Sherlock, I'll be using the cases from the original stories and the BBC series to see how he handles this case. So basically, the universe and the characters from the BBC Sherlock are in the timeline of Munster. But the cases in the original books would also be used as to how Sherlock handles this case. But how does Sherlock get involved in the case of Munster? We know that he is a consulting detective, so let's suppose Inspector Lunge, who was in charge of the case in Munster, decides to consult Sherlock. The timeline we will be using for Sherlock to get on the case is after Tenma's escape from Lunge's trap. So Tenma escapes and then Lunge gives a report of the case to Sherlock via Sherlock's website, The Science of Deduction or John's blog, as a way to contact him from Germany. The report would include all the facts Lunge and the police were able to gather about the middle-aged couple murders and all the related ones. So it would also include Tenma's statements or testimonies as he was the main suspect and on the run. Sherlock would obviously be interested in the case, so many murders across Germany and the few traces of them. After knowing the facts, I think Sherlock would feel the need to come to Germany to investigate matters himself. He has gone outside of England for solving his cases. John mentions quite a bit of them in the original stories, where Sherlock is alluded to solving some cases outside of England, such as in a short story, A Scandal in Bohemia, where John mentions of Sherlock being summoned to Odessa and clearing up a case in Trincomalee, both of which are outside of England. Now, John doesn't seem to go outside of England for Sherlock's cases, although exceptions do exist, such as the disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax, where John travels to France to investigate the matter. So it depends if Sherlock sees John as necessary for this case, and maybe he takes him along, or maybe he doesn't. On Sherlock's examination of the case, we know he won't be as stubborn as Lunge, who wasn't looking at the case objectively at the time because of his fixation on Tenma. But Lunge is actually quite similar to Sherlock. Both are cold, calculating detectives who are extremely devoted to solving their cases with their own memory techniques. And they both coincidentally describe their brain as a hard drive.
I'm inputting all the information onto the hard drive in my head.
This is my hard drive.
But I think it's safe to say Sherlock is a better detective, but Lunge is still a proof of how deceptive Johan can be to detectives of high capability, and Lunge even compared Johan to a demon because of how he couldn't collect any data when he went into Johan's room and said that he's never seen a room with so few traces of a person before. I assume if Sherlock was in the place of Lunge, he could have observed more from Johan's room, because like I said before, he has a superhuman-like ability in deductions and observations. This kind of superhuman ability also exists in Johan, but in the area of manipulation. As man, he has insane charisma, being able to persuade people to do anything he wants from them with his charm, or even make them commit suicide just by his words. Which is why Johan's manipulations and Sherlock's deductions can seem unreal and distinct to everyone. Both can seem to be supernatural at their skills and make the audience keep thinking about how unrealistically badass they are in the real world. It's a favor to humanity to put them against each other. If you guys are enjoying the video, please consider subscribing, and now back to the video. To see through Johan's deception, Sherlock would have to pass through Johan's framing towards Tenma. So would Sherlock figure out that Tenma is innocent and is being framed? Now Sherlock is great at detecting lies and understands how framing works. He understood Moriarty's tactics deeply and the psychology behind all the orchestration of making people believe that Sherlock was a fraud detective. At one point, Sherlock also had to become a fugitive, which he knew was what Moriarty would wanted, as he looks more suspicious. Tenma also became a fugitive to find Johan, hence looked even more suspicious. I don't think Sherlock is falling for Tenma running away as a definitive end to his innocence. As to determine Tenma's innocence, Sherlock has tackled a case before in the original stories which would help us find out what he could think of Tenma. This case was called the Boscombe Valley Mystery. It's a case where most of the evidence is against the suspect who was actually innocent, just like Tenma. So basically there's a son who was suspected of killing his own dad, and there's like a ton of evidence against him, and most people believe that the son is guilty and hence he was arrested. But Sherlock was still open-minded. His reasoning, as mentioned in the short story, was circumstantial evidence is a very tricky thing. It may seem to point very straight to one thing, but if you shift your own point of view a little, you may find it pointing in an equally uncompromising manner to something entirely different. So, circumstantial evidence against Tenma won't be convincing to Sherlock. He was able to form a hypothesis that the son, who had a lot of circumstantial evidence against him, could actually be innocent, as he noticed things in his testimony that others didn't even think about. He said the son's testimony had, quote, too much imagination and too little. This is important as here he was referring to the idea that if the son is the killer, why did he give statements that used his imagination for something that seems against his favor, but didn't use his imagination when it could have worked for his favor? So he observed this contradiction that he believed existed because the son was telling the truth. Now this is how I'd expect what Sherlock would react to Tenma's testimony as well, which he gave in episode 4. Tenma said that Kid Johan is the killer for the hospital murders and now is also popping middle-aged couples, but as to why he's doing this, Tenma doesn't know and Lunge is pissed. Now, he was telling the truth, which was hard to believe, and just like the statement made by the son, doesn't this also have too much imagination and too little? Sherlock would immediately notice that if Tenma is the killer, he has too much of an imagination to make such an unlikely event as an excuse where Kid Johan committed the murders while being hospitalized, and too less of an imagination at the same time for not inventing a motive for Johan that could have been reasonable during his interrogation. Sherlock was able to overlook much of the circumstantial evidence that pointed the son as the killer and explored his hypothesis that the son was innocent to see where it leads him. This is what I think he'll do with this case as well. So even though there is compelling evidence against Tenma, Sherlock would most probably still trust his observation in Tenma's questioning, just like he did with the son, because he has perceived it to be more probable and would explore the case from that angle. Now, don't get me wrong, Lunge's hypothesis of Johan being a personality inside of Tenma seems to be a reasonable interpretation, but he was overlooking facts that would have been in favor of Tenma, such as Tenma not having a sufficient motive for the middle-aged couple murders. Tenma doesn't seem to gain anything here, and nor has a revenge motive like he did before. There are also points of mystery that could lead towards something big, such as the death of the Lieberts and the disappearance of the twins back in 1986. Things Lunge started to overlook, which he was scrutinizing before. But I'm sure that Sherlock would take these points into good consideration and would explore them to verify his theory of Tenma more probably being innocent. But of course he wouldn't rule out the possibility of Tenma being the killer or just somehow involved. Tenma being a doctor does make him more suspicious. Doctors can keep their emotions in check, which perfectly fits with the lack of emotion in the crime scenes and how medically precise they are. Lunge said it, and Sherlock has said something similar in the short story of the Speckled Band. When a doctor goes wrong, he is the first of criminals. He has nerve and he has knowledge. After forming some theories while being open-minded about them, Sherlock would come to Germany to investigate. He would obviously start to explore the background of the twins and would most probably find out about 511 Kinderheim. So he would find key information about Johan, but Sherlock might still want to know where Tenma is. If he is the killer, then bingo. If he isn't, gather more information about Johan from him. Lunge was able to find out that Tenma was in Munich after his meeting with Dr. Gillen. But this meeting included an argument about a report that Dr. Gillen made on Johan's existence being real and Tenma being innocent, which Lunge dismissed. In our scenario, Sherlock would read the report alongside Lunge. This is where I believe that Sherlock's hypothesis would be confirmed to him if he didn't already confirm it by his own investigation. I presume Dr. Gillen's report has all the information from the investigations of Dr. Gillen himself, Richard Brown, Dr. Reichwein, and of course Tenma. Sherlock will most probably deduce that Dr. Gillen's report is right, and it's basically in Munich where the showdown between Sherlock and Johan will happen. It's basically head-to-head at that point. Both Johan and Sherlock would be dealing with each other in present time. So, Munich it is. Just after reading Gillen's analysis, I expect Sherlock to go straight to Munich. He will most probably recognize Johan's game here with Schuwald, who's a billionaire, and that he's using him to possibly gaining influence on Europe's economy. Richard had already suspected Johan, and his death was basically confirming that he knew a lot to die, and I don't think it's a problem for Sherlock to figure out that Richard's death was instigated by Johan somehow. Considering that even Dr. Wyquine was being targeted after picking up the investigation after him, who was able to figure out that the whiskey Richard supposedly drank through his accident was the one Richard said he'd never drink. So this seems to be a mistake on Johan's part here, which would be enough to conclude that Richard's death was not an accident. Sherlock would most probably use disguises in Munich because this isn't London where he knows the streets like the back of his hand. This is dealing with the devil himself in his hunting ground. Because I presume that Johan has many connections in Munich, like his puppets could be scattered around the city. Richard had multiple assassination attempts at him, all different methods in different areas before Johan finished the job himself. We also know that Roberto is looking around in the shadows and making moves while Johan would be busy as his secretary. So it's possible that Johan could be aware of Sherlock being onto him because of how well connected he is here, and possibly could have been tracking Lungay and therefore Sherlock. But because Sherlock is aware of these assassination attempts of Gillen's report, he's going to be a very tough man to track with his disguises. I expect Johan to know, but can his puppets get to Sherlock before it's too late? Johan might take matters into his own hands if the situation requires it, and when it comes to detectives tailing Johan, he seems to have kept his track on them and has exploited their weaknesses. He definitely does his research, which is why Johan was able to manipulate Richard as he knew a lot about him, and Roberto also seemed to know a lot about Lungay. So if Johan gets aware that Sherlock is onto him, he'll definitely try to find his flaws. It isn't that difficult for Johan to find information about Sherlock online, considering John's blogs about their cases together, and Sherlock's own website, and that he had gotten popular in general. We know that Johan's plan adapt and fluctuate according to the situation, and he will most likely switch gears if he knows that Sherlock is onto him, and possibly widen his network throughout Munich, including the police, which he has done before. It's also interesting to think that if Sherlock could deduce a lot from Johan's appearance, just like any other person, or maybe he might not have much to work with, just like it was with Aaron Adler. If you counteract this with Johan's biggest strength, which is manipulation, on Sherlock, it makes for a really badass scenario. To see if Johan can manipulate Sherlock in a conversation like he does to the others, or perhaps Sherlock finds out a way to not be manipulated by Johan. But who knows, and that's what makes it so interesting in the first place. Now back to our scenario. Sherlock gave Moriarty a really tough time when he was dealing with his organization in the original story, as he was able to let the police capture Moriarty's gang even though Moriarty himself escaped. But what's interesting here is that Lungay seems to be leading the local Munich police and is on the hand for Tenma. So it could be possible that Sherlock would try to convince Lungay to get police support once he finds compelling evidence. But if he isn't able to convince Lungay still, which I think could be more probable because of Lungay's stubbornness. Now he would have already found about Tenma planning to assassinate Johan. While observing Johan, it's important for Sherlock to stop Tenma in the process. But this would just be exposing himself to Johan, who doesn't have a problem predicting where Tenma would be, and maybe Johan anticipates this and just has Roberto and anyone he hired kill Sherlock when he tries to make contact with Tenma. And Johan would be careful of disguises. So it could basically be a chess match here if things follow this timeline, and I don't think Sherlock is falling for Johan's trap. It's ultimately coming down to who's a better planner, and I expect this to be a close contest. It was close when Sherlock was tracking Moriarty's organization, and Sherlock wasn't able to track it without Moriarty's knowledge, and received multiple assassination attempts as a result. He barely survived, just like when Richard kept receiving assassination attempts when he was investigating Johan. But the difference is this. When Johan knocked down Richard's door, we know how that turned out. But when Moriarty walked into Sherlock's flat without Sherlock anticipating it, Moriarty just warns him to not mess with him further, as he did have this sort of respect for him as an opponent. Johan is a lot more ruthless in this case, and he won't be bragging about a duel of wits. And if he was in Moriarty's place, he would have just walked into Baker Street and pop, Sherlock would have been dead. But still, let's look at the overall strategies both could use against each other. Starting off with Sherlock. It's possible that Sherlock might include his brother Mycroft in the game, who's a government official with huge influence and possibly would be aware of Schewald, because Schewald is an economic powerhouse in all of Europe. And UK was a part of the European Union in 1997, and therefore they could work together to bring down Johan, who's possibly trying to disintegrate Europe's economy. But Johan, of course, if he would have gotten aware about Sherlock, would have researched and would have considered how to deal with Mycroft as well. But if Sherlock and Mycroft's plan works, then instead of Schewald's evacuate guys, Johan is about to cause havoc, we might actually write something else with Mycroft and Schewald helping Johan.
We got him.
Now another way I noticed Sherlock could counter Johan is through the rooftop kids. Yes, You remember those kids that Johan left to play rooftop games with? This is something I'm not sure could work, but here's the thing. The deaths of the rooftop kids in Munich is something Sherlock would definitely take notice of. And one of the kids actually admitted to Johan orchestrating it. Plus, Johan is always seen around with kids. It's kinda weird that Dr. Greikwine and Gillen never approached all the kids to testify. It could have gone somewhere. Sherlock could find clever ways to tackle it and actually arrest Johan through this. There could actually be a lot of potential with this plan, which wasn't explored in the series, but I could be wrong, and although Johan will definitely tighten things up and make things hard for Sherlock, but it's still interesting to think about. Now I doubt Johan could be fooled with Sherlock approaching him with a disguise. It is something Iron Adler took advantage of in the original stories. She deduced Sherlock's outfit being indicative of a disguise, as she was familiar with male costume as an actress. Johan, who disguised as Anna in the show and fooled a cop Johan Suki, even fell in love with her. So I think Johan is clever enough to deduce Sherlock's disguise, and probably Sherlock's clever enough to deduce Johan as Anna. But what do you guys think? Could Sherlock deduce Johan as disguised as Anna? Comment below. Now another way is gain support from Lunge and the local police after finding something that challenges Johan's reputation, but I think Lunge probably still won't listen. Now let's shift the focus to Johan's strategies he could use. Johan could widen his network to pull Sherlock out and use his hired people to kill Sherlock. Could include hired people inside the police as well. A habit that Sherlock shows is that he travels a lot in cabs. Johan could just hire one cabbie to end it all. Johan could leave deceptive clues for Sherlock to beat his brains out because Sherlock does theorize and assume a lot. Johan might get him to make deductive mistakes and mess up his investigation. Although Sherlock has passed the deception of Johan being framed, Johan could provide further techniques to mess with Sherlock's investigation. Now if John comes along, Johan could threaten to kill him if Sherlock doesn't stop, or just use John to feed Sherlock receiving info by making John think he is making important observations for Sherlock when it would already been planned out to do so. Depending on Johan's goals and timeline, which changed after reading the Nameless Monster book, he could just bail out on True Vault and leave Munich without setting the library on fire after knowing what he's facing with. Then it's a bit tricky for Sherlock and others to find him, although Mycroft has intelligence operatives by which he could get to Johan, but it's very general after Munich. A lot of ambiguity as to how Johan is up to and stuff, and I think it most probably would end in Munich by either Sherlock proving Johan is guilty or catching him, or Johan escapes or maybe kills Sherlock. But what do you guys think about who will win among Urasawa's Johan and Conan Doyle's Sherlock? You can write in the comments below and possibly suggest any other video for me to make, and yeah, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.